Hello. Hello. So, a shorter video today. Today's video will be about the domestication of the dog, Canis Lupus familiaris. So, I'll be going through from the evolutionary history of the dog, late evolutionary history of the dog, through to its association with Neanderthal and Peking Man, and then through to its more definitely known domestication in human history. So the dog is a sister taxa to the grey wolf, and as you can see in this chart, the Himalayan wolf or the Tibetan wolf split off first around 250,000 years ago, then the Indian plains wolf split off around 120,000 years ago, then the late Pleistocene wolf, which we'll come to, that's the megafaunal wolf, that split off 80,000 years ago, and then 31,000 years ago, the ancestors of the dog and the grey wolf are thought to have split off. So before we go into the extant lineages of the domestic dog and into its domestication, I just wanted to talk about the association of wolves with a few earlier hominids, so with Heidelbergensis, Neanderthalensis and the Peking Man. There's a site called Boxgrove in Kent in England, that's late Heidelbergensis, so that's during the time of the transition from Heidelbergensis to Neanderthalensis, but this is still a Heidelbergensis specimen, and their bones were found in association with wolf bones, so whether their territories overlapped or whether they actually had some sort of relationship is not known. Then again, a similar thing was found in Zucudian in China, so that's the Peking Man. That's actually an even more primitive hominid. It's a form of Homo erectus, which was the predecessor of Heidelbergensis, a subspecies of Heidelbergensis predecessor. And then we have a site called Grotte du Lazaret, which is even more interesting. That's in France, and that's 125,000 years ago, dated at. So that's it's fairly late Neanderthal. It's kind of the middle Neanderthal period. And at this site, wolf skulls were found at the entrances of each of the shelters, so they seem to have been being used for decorative purposes. Whether this is because wolves were hunted or whether they were also domesticated to some degree or entirely is not known. We don't have the evidence either way, but they seem to have been revered, so they had a high place in Neanderthal society by this stage. So the canid that is directly ancestral to grey wolves, that's grey wolves and dogs, is Canis Mosbachensis, and it came about at some point around 700,000 years ago, and it was extant. It remained until about 100,000 years ago. It lived in northern Eurasia, and then as we move on, we get to Canis Variabilis. That's a subspecies of the former, and that lives in northern Eurasia. And this is the ancestors of Canis lupus proper, and we have samples from at least 360,000 years ago. Canis lupus appears somewhere between 500,000 and 300,000 years ago. It lives in the entire Hollow Arctic, so it also lives in northern Eurasia. It spreads over to the Americas, and as you'll see, there's a study I'll post which refers to the eastern populations of wolves, which are responsible for at least part of the lineages in dogs, and they also made their ways across the Straits of Beringia there. Then we move on to the megafaunal wolf. So the megafaunal wolf is a wolf which splits off from modern grey wolves. It lives in the northern Hollow Arctic. It's proposed as one ancestor of modern dogs alongside the grey wolf. So modern dogs are closer to grey wolves than megafaunal wolves, or rather they cluster in between the two genetically, so they seem to have had ancestors from both. So there are various arguments which point to there being multiple domestication events, at least 2 domestication events. There's even a site which is not one of the things I've added to my notes so far, but I'll check if I can find it quickly and maybe tag it onto the end, where 2 different breeds were found at one particular site, and so it's speculated that one had already been domesticated earlier and one was domesticated later. And as you'll see again, there was a domestication event in the east, and the dogs were then brought over to the west in the Bronze Age and mixed with the western lineages. So according to some studies, dog versus grey wolf mtDNA split off between 100 and 135,000 years ago, so that's the maternal lineages, whereas the range for the Y-DNA is a little bit broader. It's given us somewhere between 60,000 and 150,000 years before the present time. So then moving on from this megafaunal wolf, we get the Paleolithic dog, which the Paleolithic dog is a form of this megafaunal wolf, or a form of the grey wolf. It's somewhere between the two, and it shows the first signs of domestication in the form of some neoteny. And it shows a broadening of the jaw, it shows a shortening of the jaw, it shows a shortening of the face, and it shows the overcrowding of teeth in the jaw, which is also thought to have been linked to the reduced aggression that was important in the early stage of dog domestication. So the Paleolithic dog is present from 40,000 years ago to about 16,000 years ago, and it's present in a very wide range, all the way from Belgium, so all the way from the west of Europe to Siberia. And in terms of size, in terms of weight, it was around 36 to 37 kilos. So it was similar to fairly large modern breeds, which is a little bit smaller. The Pleistocene wolves were 42 to 44 kilos, and modern wolves are 41 to 42 kilos. So it's a little bit smaller than those. And the image I've been showing for this section is the Central Asian Sheperd Dog, which studies have shown to be the closest metrically to that of the Paleolithic dog. I will do another video or two on the relationship between dogs and early humans at some stage, but first, to conclude, here's a diagram of ancient breeds. So as you can see, there's an eastern ancient lineage. They're the Shar-pei, the Shibu Inu, the Chow-chow, and the Akita Inu. And then you have western ancient breeds, the Basenji, the Siberian Husky, the Alaskan Malamute, the Afghan Hound, the Saluki, and then all other breeds relate to those last two there.